So I think the way that I found my way to this work of working with yoga and addiction recovery was through my own story. Yoga was something that I found in my very early 20s. By then, my own disease of addiction had taken hold pretty hard. I'd been drinking since I was 13, and I was about 21 when I took my first yoga class. However, as the disease does, it progresses unless we treat it and we arrest it and we begin to look deeply at causes and conditions, which I wasn't willing to do. It progresses, and it did in my case for many years, all the way to the point that I saw my grandmother and my mother pass away from this disease. And my journey has been one of reconciling, family issues with personal trauma, with finding a way for my story to be of value to other people, and then now being able to share that. And for me, I'm grateful for yoga and meditation and embodied practices of many types, not just yoga, because it gave me tools that helped me to understand in my body when it was time to change and when it was time for me to become available and receptive to the possibility of change. And had I missed some of those signs, I might not be sitting here today. And I have no illusions about that this is a disease that if left untreated can be progressive, fatal. And I'm grateful that that was some years ago. I still consider myself to be very much in early recovery. But today, the good news is that I have tons of resources available to me that were always there. I just wasn't really great at accepting them. And now I get to be of service. And the way that I'm most of service these days is through teaching the leadership training for the Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. And what that means is I get to travel around this side of the country mostly and visit communities, all of which are universally affected by the disease of addiction in some way, shape, or form. And to meet lots of professionals working in this field, and to talk about yoga, to talk about embodiment, to talk about what it takes to be on a sustainable path of recovery, and to use the tools that are available to us, to really heal the mind and the body and the spirit. And the spiritual piece was so big for me, and I think that comes directly from my exposure to yoga at a fairly early age, even though it was many years before I actually got clean and sober. So I'm grateful for where I'm at today. And especially to talk about this topic, which is one of my favorite subjects by far to talk about, and with a really wonderful group of people that I love the work that you're all doing and just respect you all so much. So thanks for being a part of it.
Thanks, Dina. Thanks. So I got here similarly, but in a little bit different fashion. I entered recovery, and early on, probably about 3 months into my own recovery, I had a sponsor, this was a long time ago, who took me to a yoga class. I had no interest in yoga. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't really care, but I was at a point where I was just doing like whatever people were telling me to do, because everything I'd tried previous to that wasn't working for me. First class, it was in someone's living room, because there really weren't any studios then. We moved all the furniture, threw down our beach towels, and it was a ragtag bunch of people, and it clicked. Something was just, after it was over, I thought that was cool. At the time I was going to meetings, because that was something else I was told to do. I was seeing a therapist, because that was something else I was told to do. And yoga came in right at the beginning for me. So those two things went hand in hand, and I can't imagine my recovery without it. Fast forward, I decided after many, many years of practice and study with teachers at the Kripalu Center up in Massachusetts to do a teacher training. And I did that and started teaching. Met a teacher who introduced me to Yoga Nidra. That then became an addition to my practice, and there was always meditation was in there with my asana practice as well. Yoga Nidra became a huge piece of my personal practice through this teacher. And then I moved to Virginia, I moved back to Virginia, and met a man who owns a treatment center for gambling addiction up in Hanover, near here. And he was very open-minded and wanted a holistic treatment center and wanted yoga therapy there. And at that point, I was certified to teach yoga. I was certified in yoga therapy. So I went up there, and through the back door, when he learned that I was in recovery, he asked me to do some peer coaching, and that was before that was kind of a formal service. So I started doing more one-on-one with people, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to school, because my addiction took me away from school on many occasions, and I just never finished. So I went back to school, got certified as a substance abuse counselor, worked at that facility for about 5 years, and at that point we started treating drug and alcohol addiction as well as gambling issues. Then I went to work at a methadone clinic, and I was there for 4 years and learned a whole lot about medication-assisted treatment and working with people who were heroin users, long-time heroin users. And I was able to share, we didn't get on the floor on our mats or anything, but I was able to share yoga nidra seated, meditation practices seated. After that, I decided I needed some space. I needed space on my calendar. So I jumped ship, as they say, and I now still do work in a medication-assisted facility, where we offer other services as well, psychiatric services. I teach, or I lead yoga therapy groups for adults and adolescents at an eating disorders clinic not far from here, and still see some people privately, and run some substance abuse groups, IOP groups, and continuing care groups. So I've seen addiction from all angles, whether it's drugs, alcohol, all different ages, different ways it presents, how it can go away one place and pop up in another place. And letting people know that everything that they process doesn't have to go through their brain and come out their mouth, so that for the rest of their lives they're not going to have to be talking about this. But sometimes we can just feel it, and things go away, and you wake up the next day and say, I feel better. I'm not exactly sure why, but thank you, wherever that came from. So it's just stuck with me for a very, very long time, and I'm connected to PYR because I used to teach here. I don't anymore, but I still feel connected to PYR and refer a lot of folks here because it's a great community for people in recovery because of the Y12SR classes. So, I think any yoga is good for recovery, but for people who are nervous and not really sure where to go, that's where I send them.
So I grew up in a family riddled with addictions. So I grew up with a distorted perception that I had to choose one or many. So it's like I'm a card-carrying member of many 12-step programs. And I remember when I was 19, I had to take a PE elective for college. And because of my schedule, my choices were fencing or yoga. And And so thank God I chose yoga, and I was very fortunate in that it wasn't just a physical practice. The woman that taught it was integral trained, and we learned the yamas and the niyamas, the spirituality, the philosophy, all of it. And that just really planted a seed. And I was still very active in a lot of the crazy things that I was doing, but that was a place that I experienced peace for the very first time in 19 years. And it resonated with me. And so I often say that I had an off again, on again love affair with yoga for many, many years. When I was 35, I finally came into recovery. And I guess I've been in recovery about 2 years. And I started picking up the practice of yoga again. Now, I had practiced other places before then, but there was a huge difference once I got into recovery. And for me, it's very much the spiritual piece. I kind of got the spiritual piece here, but not here. I wasn't ready for it here. But after coming into 12-step recovery and finding a God of my understanding, I was able to connect with the spirituality piece of yoga. And so for many, many years, I would go to, these days are my meeting days and these days are my yoga days, and I had to have both. And then I was very fortunate that I can't remember how long I've been in recovery, but I found PYR as a student and went, wow, they have them together. They have Y12SR. I can do a meeting and a yoga practice all at the same time. Isn't that fabulous? And I was working at a job that I thought I would retire from. I was married for the second time, and I just thought life had been perfect. I had arrived, and I know now that if I think I've arrived, I need to go to more meetings, because that's a problem. And I ended up being in a car accident, and I couldn't do my job anymore. And so through encouragement from many teachers here at PYR, I went and got my teacher training. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Rishikesh, India to get my teacher training. I also got Y12SR certified. And the path has just blown wide open for me in a place that I never thought I'd be at my age. And I'm fortunate enough, I teach at jails and prisons. I teach at a city-run treatment center. And it is probably, somebody mentioned service. That is what my life is today. My life is service. And I'm fortunate enough that I get paid for it, I have one-on-one clients as well. Was gifted the opportunity to become a peer recovery support specialist in addition to all of this. So that's opening new doors all over the place as well. And it's just no place I ever thought I'd be. And I know it has to be because I decided to look at my own demons. And so I feel very fortunate that I have the opportunity to hold space, safe, sacred space, so other people can look at their demons and know that they have tools that they won't get trapped with them. Because that was my fear. That's one of the things that yoga gave me was, even in recovery, there were things that I didn't want to look at because I thought I'd get stuck there. But yoga gave me ways to come out of it. I could feel it in my body, and if I started going into a contracted state, I could take a deep breath. Who would have thought? So that's, and then I also get to teach Y12SR here at PYR, where I started. So I still get chill bumps every time I think about that. And I feel very blessed in that I get to do that.
Thanks, Billie. So I got into the world of recovery because I'm in recovery myself, and I started drinking and using when I was 15 years old, and all the way up until I was 35, it was a daily thing. I barely drew a sober breath ever, and I needed it for everything. I needed it to function on any level, to interact with people, family, to go to sleep, to wake up, to eat, to do everything. And when I finally landed in a treatment center, and these people showed up in my life, and they wanted nothing to do but to help me, to show me how to live and to show me how to stay sober. It's two things I knew absolutely nothing about. I was 35 years old, and I was helpless, and these people just were putting out their hand to help me, and they were teaching me about the 12 steps and about how to stay sober, and and I believed them, and I started doing what they suggested that I do, and miraculously I got sober. And I started working a 12-step program and doing all the things that they suggest that you do in a 12-step program. And I stayed sober, and my life started to get better. And it was amazing. That was a spiritual experience in and of itself, just watching things work out for once, because they seemed to never work out before. But I was doing everything that the program suggested that I do, and I still had these times where, I was so up in my head and so stressed out and just full of anxiety, full of tension, and depression and suicidal ideation and all these things, but I was doing everything the program suggested I was doing, but I was staying sober, and I would have moments of happiness and things like that. But through a friend, I landed in a yoga class, and it was a recovery yoga class, so a lot of the terminology that the teacher used was all about addiction recovery from whatever it is that you're recovering from, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, sex, trauma, whatever, and I get there, and, I have my first yoga class, and in the end, in Shavasana, I get this feeling of peace and my mind just like calmed down, and like stillness, and I was totally blown away, because there was a feeling of peace that I did not know that was obtainable, and so I was hooked. So I started going every day, and or every time that she had a class. And then eventually she moved out of state, and I needed to find somewhere else to practice yoga. So I found Project Yoga Richmond, So I came here, and the community here is so amazing. And there's a Y12SR class, and started taking the classes here. And the original yoga teacher saw how dedicated I was to my practice and really pushed me to become an instructor. So she really pushed me to take my teacher training, which I did. And then as soon as I graduated that training, I took the Y12SR certification with Dana, and got Y12SR certified. And basically, my whole feeling on it is, I came from hell. I mean, the trauma of addiction, the trauma of life, and I wouldn't have dreamed that there was a way out where I could feel good, where I could feel peaceful and be happy. But it's true. It is in fact a reality, and my purpose, I feel like today, is to be able to offer that for other people. So teach Y12SR at a recovery center twice a week. Also teach regular vinyasa flow yoga classes. A life of service. I found that when I give myself to a life of service, everything else takes care of itself. And so that's why I'm here.
That's great. One of the things you said, Billie, which I thought was really important, is that you were fortunate enough early on to have a teacher who brought in the complete practice of yoga. And that's one of the things that I think is so great about Y12SR, is because I know that's going to be there when I'm referring people to a class. I know they're going to get like the whole package. When I first started practicing yoga, that was kind of all anybody was teaching. It was all very traditional, and it was, and now that we've moved into sort of a more asana-based culture, I think it's hard to figure out where to direct people toward a class. And to what you were saying about that feeling of peace, I've also learned that for some people, particularly during Yoga Nidra, which most people look forward to and just can't wait to get there, for some folks, it provokes great anxiety. Closing their eyes, being still, feeling like they shouldn't move, So that's been a lesson for me as a teacher, to say, don't close your eyes if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel unsafe, know that you might cry, you might laugh, because of the emotions that can arise, not just in Yoga Nidra, but in any yoga practice. And I think it's important to let our students know and let our peers know how much we love them and appreciate what they do and accept them where they are, which is also a component of recovery. That's how recovery works best. And I think that's how teaching works best, when all those pieces come into it,
Yeah, I heard that too, and I'm remembering how patient the teachers that I've been fortunate to have been with me. One of the earliest conversations that I remember having relative to this topic of working in the so-called addiction recovery field with yoga was here in this very room back in, I think, 2011, when my teacher Nikki Myers was doing the training here, and I think it was the first time I'd ever had the exposure to the union of yoga principles and 12-step and how they could work together. And never having been in a 12-step meeting, never having gotten sober, never having adopted this, what is now a lifestyle. It's a way of being for me, even more than a lifestyle. On a break, I said, some of you have probably heard me tell this story before, but I said, Nikki, I really want to help those people. I really want to help addicts. I really think I want to work with addicts, and help them. But I've never been to a 12-step meeting. What can you tell me that would help me do that work? And she just took a breath, as we do, and said, you could try some open Al-Anon meetings. And I was like, well, there's an idea. Mm-hmm. And I know now what that was. I know that was code. She knew my story, and she knew my family history, and she probably saw me sweating it and struggling over here on the other side of the room and trying to figure out how I was going to help other people without helping myself, dealing with what was in here. She probably recognized that and said, okay, here's something that could help, with a really good set of boundaries around, you should do this. She said, here's a suggestion. And that's what I mean when I say the openness to taking suggestions and to receiving the help that's offered to us. One thing that I heard you all kind of reflect on was how you were exposed to things that were maybe new and unfamiliar, but at some point you decided to just kind of go with it, and then it led to wonderful places where you're at now. And like you said, we've never really arrived. If I ever get there, then I know I need to go back and probably do a few more steps. But it's all part of it. And and I'm grateful that for whatever reason, the yoga teachers, that I had that came my way were people in long-term recovery, many years, more than a decade, in some cases 2 decades of recovery, because it showed me what that life could look like. I think we need examples without, the principles, the personalities over principles thing, getting in the way. But the idea that I think we do need examples of people living sober and living a life of service, to your point, that give us, okay, so here's a North Star for me to, point my ship toward. And that was really, really the case for me. And I'm so grateful for that. And that they were patient with me so that I could continue, to feel like wherever I was at was where I needed to be. And that though I did struggle and still do, even, things happen, it's life on life's terms every single day and every year in and year out, that it does get better. It doesn't always get easier. It may get a little harder for a while, but the tools that I learned, the ability to ground and to root and to resource my breath, even to have difficult conversations, even to sit in meetings that I don't want to be in, whether we're talking about 12-step meetings or other kinds of meetings or just being with, in different family environments or things that are challenging, it's been such a resource for me. And, it always goes back to, were you willing to hear the message, and were you willing to take the next step, And so I've been sitting here thinking about, what were the positive steps that we each took that turned out to be big wins for us? What was the step that you said, this feels right, and how has that turned out to be, a real win? I've heard a lot of reflection about that. I think that one of the things that gets in the way is that for me, kind of shutting down a good idea before it has a chance to even play out, So there may be some preconceived notions, as you're saying, about yoga and what yoga is, and so keeping us out of the rooms of yoga for that reason, or keeping us out of 12-step for that reason, until we have the willingness to step in and to see where it takes us. And then just the stigma and the shame that I think so many addictions carry. One of the things that we've talked about in the Yoga of 12-Step Recovery and in other modalities, I'm sure, is that the disease of addiction is more than just, as you were saying, drugs and alcohol. It's so many things. It's technology. It's social media. It's gaming. It's shopping addictions. It's food. It's sex. It's you name it. And so once I started to understand neurologically what was happening in the brain when addiction is present, I said, well, gosh, it sounds like it's really common. Like it's so common that it's almost universal that these habits and these patterns that we form they're just part of the human experience. And that's been something that I really enjoy learning about, how, yoga can help us to overcome lots of different kinds of patterns. So anyway, it's been a really wonderful exploration for me in that vein, to destigmatize and to really normalize what that looks like.
It's funny that you mentioned the whole thing about stigmatized, because I teach teaching in the jails to guys, and I also teach in a men's inpatient facility. And they come in like this, because they're like, we're not going to do yoga. And what I tell everybody is, if you're breathing, you're already doing yoga, so why don't you give it a try? And, they will try, like, there are certain poses I have learned never to do in a men's prison ever again. One of them is downward dog, and that was a big mistake on my part. But the breath part and the breathing, and to see them start to decompress a little bit, that's been one of my greatest gifts. And, they are still resistant to many things. Like, they don't like some of the poses, like we do pigeon in a chair, and they're like, oh my God, you're trying to kill me. I know I'm trying to relieve the issues from your tissues. But there's been a lot less stigmatizing of that. And these are some very under-resourced facilities. And, the guys are like, where do you teach? Can I do this after I leave here? I'm like, yeah, you can. I said, you don't need to do yoga just with me. You can do yoga with other people too. And to see that transformation and to see it get destigmatized is such a huge gift, I think. So when you said that, that just kind of was like, yeah. And you were talking about yoga nidra. In the places I teach, often I can't do more than 30 seconds of a shavasana. And people, you can feel the tension start to come up. And I get it. Where if I gave somebody in a private, in a public class, 30 seconds of shavasana, they'd be going, what? So it's a learning curve, I think. I think that's one of the big things about this is a learning curve.
It's interesting. Y'all mentioned yoga nidra and, finding a practice that's appropriate for the group that you're teaching. And, I take Y12SR into a recovery center, and oftentimes they've got like a couple days, sober, and getting them to go on their mat and do asana or anything like that is basically impossible. You might get like one or two of them. So I've started to offer the yoga nidra instead, and to watch, it go from like maybe one or two people participating to the entire population of participants, and then seeing them be reminded of the fact that, that peace is possible, and watching them light up afterwards has been a gift for sure.
The word travels. You're like, that's good. That's a good thing. You want to go do that. Yeah.
And where it's led to me, for me, is it's just opened up possibilities. Yes, it's about peace on the mat, but it's also about what we choose to do with that once we step off of the mat and back into our lives and back into challenging environments, trying to live sober with temptation, or just deal with disparities and other things that we may experience in our lives once we get out and moving around and just interacting with the world. How do we maintain that stability and that sense of self-regulation so that we can continue to show up and do the work that we need to do, that needs to be done?
Yeah, especially working with people with substance abuse, because there's often co-occurring mental health issues there. And I think it's important when we're working with that population to recognize what I know for me, what I can do, and when I refer. When I say, you know what, I really want you to keep doing this, but you can't keep doing this until you see this person too. Or here's a list of resources, why don't you try some of those things too? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But taking care of ourselves in that work, or else we can't do that work, And it is more than a lifestyle, it's just who I am now. I don't know how that happened, but I just, got to. Acceptance, a lot of acceptance.
Yeah, and this is a path that I know I have to walk, but I don't have to do it alone, right? That's the message, right? That we don't have to do it alone. And that's the best message, right?
Yeah, it is. And PYR has evolved into a place of community for so many people, and I just love it for that. I love being able to send people here. I love seeing people I met who started coming here when I was teaching here, and now they're out there teaching in the community, and it's just been this great evolution and such a great resource, I think, for Richmond, really. It really has. Everybody knows about it now, I think.
And I find it interesting because, part of why I became a teacher and went into teacher training was because of taking classes here at PYR, and now I see my students that are venturing out into teacher training because of the atmosphere here at PYR. And it's kind of like in recovery, we get so much and then we give back to recovery, and it feels like the same thing here. They're giving back to the community. They got so much here, they want to give it again. And so that part reminds, and I don't see that as much in the other studios where I teach. You know, I see a little bit, but I see a whole lot of it here at PYR. I think that's one of the things that makes it so special.
It is a special community of people.
Yeah.
At every level. Yeah, we're lucky that way.
Yeah.